Welcome, Gunrunner.
This video is brought to you by A Compendium of ZX Spectrum Games Volume 1 by Kieran Hawken and Amazon Publishing. This paperback book features over 300 game reviews from the early days in 1982 right up to the modern homebrew games of today, as well as 3 developer interviews, fascinating facts and trivia, personal stories, and much more, making it the ultimate companion to Sir Clive Sinclair's iconic 8-bit computer. This greatly revised second edition of the book is available worldwide and features large full-colour pages, a glossy cover, and can be bought for less than £20. So what are you waiting for? Get your copy today. Those of you who have been watching my channel for some time may remember my previous Sinclair ZX Spectrum exclusives video back in July 2021, and you might be wondering why I'm returning to the subject. Well, as the title actually suggests here, this time around I will only be looking at games that run on the later 128K Spectrums, where the previous video looked at games that were aimed at the original 16K and 48K models. Now those of you who aren't so clued up on the Spectrum, like my good friends across the pond, will probably be wondering what's the difference apart from the amount of RAM, and thinking, does a computer with more memory really deserve its own video? So I'll quickly explain why this matters. The main difference, certainly as far as games are concerned, comes in the form of the 3-channel AY sound chip, which can be found in all 128K enabled Spectrums, which includes the original Sinclair produced 128K Plus, or Toast-Rack as it's more commonly known these days, as well as the Amstrad manufactured Plus 2, Plus 2A, Plus B and Disc-based Plus 3. Sadly, there are no graphical upgrades at all with 128K machines, but the addition of a proper sound chip certainly made a big difference to the game playing experience, and the extra memory allowed for much larger games that no longer required troublesome multi-loads. Now I've explained the hardware side, I just want to add some important notes about how I qualified the software. You see, there are lots of games that add extra things such as music, speech and indeed remove those aforementioned multi-loads on 128K Spectrums. But right here I'm only including games that will work on these later expanded home micros. I'm also only including games released in Western Europe. In fact, all of these originate from the Spectrum's homeland in the UK anyway, rather than games released in Russia, where there are a wide range of different Spectrum clones that had the same amount of memory and similar sound chips but used a different operating system. Phew, that took a lot more explaining than I thought it would, but I really did think that the explanation was important, and if you want to know more about the 128K Spectrums and their history, then check the links in the description, because they will very much fulfill your needs. So with all that out of the way, it's now time to get on with the show, as I proudly present 10 amazing Sinclair ZX Spectrum 128K exclusives.
Right, pay attention, Bond. This is the Sinclair ZX Spectrum Plus 2. It's a fully operational computer with 128K memory, but it comes with 3 James Bond games and a light gun that fires armor-piercing shells. Now that's your assignment. No, don't sit in that chair! Sorry, Bond. Haven't perfected that yet. The Sinclair ZX Spectrum Plus 2.
With Great Britain's recent series of successes at the Summer Olympics, it's easy to forget that it wasn't always this way, and it was our lack of success that saw Daley Thompson become such a huge star and national hero back in the 80s. In fact, with his 4 world records, 2 Olympic gold medals, 3 Commonwealth titles and wins in both the World and European Championships, Thompson is widely regarded by many to be one of the greatest decathletes of all time. Because of this huge star power, Manchester-based Ocean Software quickly signed him up to produce a series of games such as Daley Thompson's Decathlon and Daley Thompson's Super Test. They then released an updated and enhanced 128K only version of the latter that takes the original 8 events, which are pistol shooting, cycling, diving, slalom skiing, rowing, penalty shootout, ski jump and tug of war, and adds 4 new ones: 100 metres hurdles, javelin, sprint and triple jump. Unlike the previous game in the series, Daley Thompson's Decathlon Super Test is less about joystick waggling and more about actual skill. That's not to say there isn't any waggling going on though, there's still a few events that will very much punish your trusty joystick, but there's a lot more variation, making it a much better game. Visually it's pretty good for the most part, and the new 128K sound is a pretty big upgrade. This next game was actually given away free on the cover tape that came attached to the front of issue 81 of the legendary ZX Spectrum magazine Crash. Created by Greek programmer Theo Develegas, who seemed to make a whole career out of creating cover tape games for various magazines, and they all seem to be of a decent quality too, including this very addictive puzzler. For the most part, this plays like one of those plastic sliding block puzzles we all got in our Christmas stockings as kids, but with one pretty big difference. Whereas in those games you just kept having to swap the pieces around until you got them in the right order, Talking Heads gives you an extra 5 squares along the bottom that you can move the pieces into. You can't just swap these squares around either, you can only move them into empty squares, so you need to think before you just randomly start moving them around. In the side panel there is a small mini-map that shows each of these pieces with numbers on them instead, which helps you track where you need to place them, and this area also displays your level, the number of moves you've made, your lives and the timer. If the time does indeed run out before you put the picture back together, which are all pictures of famous politicians, you lose a life. Talking Heads certainly isn't that impressive on a technical level, but it sure is a lot of fun to play. The original Technician Ted was released in 1985 as Hewson's response to the hugely successful Jet Set Willy. It was exactly the same kind of game where you simply guided a little guy from room to room collecting all the flashing objects. This also involved pixel perfect platforming, avoiding lethal enemies and keeping an eye on the time. It was pretty shameless and didn't even try to hide its inspirations, however that didn't make it a bad game. Quite the opposite in fact, with magazines of the time regarding it as the best pretender to the Spectrum's platforming crown, and it proved to be very successful for the publisher too. So when the new model of the ZX Spectrum came along at the end of 1985, they decided to do an extended megamix of the game to take advantage of the enhanced hardware. So what are the differences to the original version then? Well, there's now double the amount of rooms for a start, meaning there are over 100 different locations to explore. Rather unsurprisingly, there is also in-game music too, as well as a new intro sequence and several gameplay tweaks including numbered tasks, which helps greatly in trying to complete this huge game. The graphics are exactly the same, but they are nice and colourful nonetheless. Technician Ted the Megamix was the first standalone game released for the 128K Specky and still holds up really well today. As I mentioned in the intro, there aren't that many genuine Spectrum 128K exclusives, with most of the games being either ports from other machines or simply 48K machines with added music and or the removal of those dreaded multi-loads. But one area where the enhanced spec is flourished is in the text adventure genre, where there are loads of titles unique to the extra memory machines. So with this in mind, it was quite hard deciding which one I was going to include here, but I was really drawn to the title screen of Poan in particular, which briefly describes the game's premise, ignoring how attractive it looks. The promise of a supernatural take on a mystery set in Cornwall, where my dad's family originates from, was incredibly intriguing. Once I started playing the game, I wasn't disappointed either, as all the major locations are accompanied by an attractive graphic and the story is very well done indeed. It has a large command database with all the usual instructions present, and it never takes that long to move to the next location or decision, like a lot of other Spectrum text adventures that are far too slow moving for my liking. And there isn't a lot more to tell you about this one really, and a lot of reasoning over whether you should play it comes down to your liking of text adventures in general. If you're a fan of the long lost genre, then this is one that you should definitely be adding to your playlist. CRL were a pretty prolific publisher for the ZX Spectrum back in the mid-80s, so it wasn't a surprise to see them jump on the 128K only bandwagon too. But unlike most of their rivals who simply released new versions of existing games, they came out with something completely new and original, and a game that is rather unique too. They Call Me Trooper has an absolutely bonkers plot that explains there's been some kind of intergalactic conference that has been infiltrated by an aggressive alien race, focused solely on conquering the universe. They have assimilated many of these world leaders and their accomplices, but somehow you, Earth's most decorated soldier, Major R.A. Trooper, have escaped the brain drain and need to get back home to launch a counter-offensive. Problem is that all the ships have been destroyed, so you need to find all the parts of one, put it back together and then escape. But as well as meeting aliens that need to be killed, you'll also meet fellow soldiers who have been assimilated, and when you encounter one of these you have to engage in one-on-one combat, at which point it flips to a rather clever zoomed in viewpoint. They Call Me Trooper certainly has some nice ideas, but is let down a little by the messy graphics and poor in-game sound. But I still recommend you play it for the original elements alone. There's nothing else quite like it out there. Often compared to the classic ZX Spectrum arcade adventure Tir Na Nog, this particular quest simulator is rather unique by being a purely icon-driven affair. In the game you play the part of a young wizard who has decided to try and rid the land of Dragonia from evil in order to impress his elders and be accepted into the inner circle. The problem is that our hero, Sabrina, has come totally unprepared. No weapons, no magic potions, and no supplies of any kind. So if you're going to succeed in your mission, you'll have to search the landscape for things you can use whilst not getting killed. Once you've collected some items, you'll need to work out which ones can be combined to make spells, where they can be used and what uses they have. It's fair to say that there is a lot of trial and error involved in this game, especially when you've just got started. Thankfully there is a save game option, so I recommend you use this quite regularly or you'll probably end up getting killed before you even get anywhere. It has to be said that the graphics in Dragonia are stunning. They did their very best to avoid colour clash completely here, and the main sprite is very nicely animated too. There's also a rather good soundtrack here, even if it does get a tad annoying after a while. If you like LucasArts style point and click adventure games, then this is probably the closest thing you'll find on the Spectrum. Released 2 years before, the original Matchday was a huge hit for Ocean Software and widely regarded as the best football game available for a home computer. In fact, many people regarded it as the first decent soccer simulation full stop, and it's hard to disagree when looking at what came before. Designed and developed by ZX Spectrum legend John Rittman, who also programmed the likes of Batman and Head Over Heels, Matchday was his only sports game and spawned several sequels, including the 128k only remake of sorts. With International Matchday, he took the original game, got rid of all the awful sound and replaced it with something a lot better, added a new intro and some extra options, put in a number of graphical enhancements and, best of all, added a new international tournament mode. We still have the same horizontally scrolling action for 1 or 2 players, where your player is switched automatically to the closest one to the ball, and the same focus on playing a passing game. If you keep the ball too long, expect to get tackled and lose it. The new graphical elements like the cutscenes are great, and the new audio is an absolutely huge improvement, especially the crowd noises and the opening rendition of the iconic Match of the Day theme. This still plays a little bit slow for my liking, but there's still no doubting this game's pedigree. Not to be confused with the famous PC Engine shoot-em-up by Compile that is also known as Blazing Lasers, the ZX Spectrum Gunhead is actually the sequel to the equally awesome Crash cover tape game Solaris, and is another game by Greek geek Theo Develagas, who has already featured once in this video. Although it's unrelated, as I mentioned, this Gunhead is also a shoot-em-up, but this time of the horizontally scrolling variety. So the game itself here is actually pretty simple. Just fly along each level, shoot all the enemies, stay alive, and then once the time at the bottom has run down, you get to face an end of level boss. Destroy the mothership and then you move on to the next level for more of the same. What makes this game special though is the audio, which is what makes Gunhead a 128K only affair. This consists of a digitised intro sequence that includes both speech and a small piece of music, which I believe is Black Sabbath. Then once you start playing it, you'll hear a very nice rendition of the final countdown, the 1986 top 10 hit by Swedish big hair enthusiasts Europe. You will notice that on the title screen there is various options regarding this sound, including the ability to either turn effects or music on and off. I must mention this because the sound effects are supplied by the 48K beeper, so they don't interfere with the music and are absolutely horrendous, so I strongly suggest turning them off. One of the more obscure commercial 128K exclusives, Anko's Kingdom of Krell, is interesting for a number of different reasons. Firstly, there's the genre, because these kind of icon-driven RPG style adventures aren't too common on the system. These were something that very much came into their own once the 16-bit computers came along. Secondly, it's worth mentioning the author, one Steve Screech, who is probably best known for his work on two very famous football game franchises, in the form of Kickoff and Championship Manager. Lastly, we have to talk about the rather strange B-side to the tape that includes a 30-minute soundtrack containing all sorts of spoken hints for the game, partially masked by a range of ambient noises. In terms of plot, it's your usual fantasy quest type thing that's not really worth going into here, as it would take too long, but there definitely seems to be a lot of Dungeons & Dragons influences here, not just in terms of theme, but also in the way the various characters are formed and how you deal with them. There is just so much to discover here, hence why it requires 128K of memory and will take you hours to get through the whole game. Unfortunately, this isn't helped much by the slow speed, but that can be excused somewhat by the excellent graphics that are loaded with each scene. RPG fans will find an awful lot to like about the Kingdom of Krell. One of the more famous 128K only exclusives, like many others of the era, Suos World is a greatly extended and enhanced version of an existing game. This time the game in question is Gargoyle's very highly regarded Suos World. Clever title change, eh? A 3D isometric adventure starring a rather unusual character who is very much inspired by Stan Laurel. The plot is the same as the original game, telling us that the artificial planetoid Nuts Folly has been overrun by the bizarre genetic experiments of the mad Baron Nuts. It's up to a robot called Suos, which is an acronym for Self-Willed Extreme Environment Vocational Organism, to clean up the place and get it operational again. So Suos must make his way around the flip screen isometric map, destroying all the malfunctioning robots by dropping objects on them or manoeuvring them into traps. Suos can walk, but he can't jump, so must use elevators to climb over any walls or obstacles. The world is made up of 200 screens, split into 4 levels, and this 128k upgrade adds an extra 50 on top of that. The only other enhancement comes in the audio experience, as you no doubt imagined. This is actually quite disappointing, as there's no in-game music at all, just on the title screen. This letdown aside, Suos World is still an excellent arcade adventure for the 128k Spectrum, and I highly suggest checking out its sequel, Hydrofall 2.
With the new Sinclair Spectrum Plus 3, I can be who I want to be. With the built-in disk drive, I can be the fastest rider off the grid. With the 128k memory, I can be the most powerful force in the universe. And you get 6 other free games and a free joystick.
You're turning into a real computer expert. And at £199, I've saved the Earth.
The new Sinclair Spectrum Plus 3 with built-in disk drive. Who would you like to be?
And that rounds up my look at 10 amazing Sinclair ZX Spectrum 128k exclusives. Can you think of any other titles that only ever came out for this popular 8-bit computer? Or do you think some of these games were unworthy of inclusion? I would also love to hear the thoughts and views of my audience, so please get typing in that comments section. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons for continuing to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to the following patrons and YouTube backers in particular for their much appreciated pledges: Paul Daniel, Mins, Dos Gamerman, Luke MC, Carl Olsen, Seth Robinson, Grady Haynes, Mark Strickland, Klimatorn, Trogdor the Burninator, Daniel Skronsky, Ben P. Stein, Tabby Kitsune, Alan J. Dodds, Your Eyes Are Bleeding, and Electron Star Collapse. If you also want to help support all my creative endeavours, including this YouTube channel, then please go and check out my Patreon right now. You can get access to host extra content, including downloads, exclusive videos, creative insights, and much more besides. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.